Hi, I'm Forrest, and I'd actually like to talk to you today about electric vehicles. Specifically, how I feel changing the collective youth perception about electric vehicles is the critical component in getting them more widely adopted. I'm actually going to talk in three parts today. I'm going to start with a story of a reality in which electric vehicles are not only cool, but they're commonplace. Then I'm going to actually explore why this doesn't happen right now and the factors that come together to help change this. Finally, we're going to look to history to find examples of how transformative new technology and ideas were portrayed in a way that actually made them so they could appeal to a more mass market. All right, let's start with the story. Let's put yourselves in the shoes of a young man, not all too unlike myself. This young man's name is Jackson. Jackson is in his early 20s, he's a student, and on this specific day, Jackson is going to buy his first car. We can all think back to this experience, the excitement coming onto the lot, seeing all the different models, that new car smell, the fresh leather, the little tinge of fear and anxiety about spending so much money in a single day. There really isn't all that much making Jackson's experience different from anything that we can relate to, except for the fact that the vehicle Jackson is buying, it doesn't use a single drop of gasoline. It has zero emissions and runs completely on electric power. The coolest part about this situation that I'm laying out in front of you is that Jackson doesn't even bat an eye at what he's doing. It's just another vehicle to him. And I think that's what we really need to make happen. Let's be honest. The situation I just laid out is pretty unlikely to happen today. Any consumer of electric vehicles, so specifically a young person, is really faced with two options. On one hand, we have a valiant first attempt at making a great electric vehicle that is a thing that needed to happen. It was a good start, but the problem is it really falls short on a lot of key aspects. It has a limited range, and to some, it's not the most aesthetically pleasing vehicle. Moving forward, we have the opposite end of the spectrum, which is a super high-end luxury sedan that has incredible performance, luxury features, and pretty much runs quiet circles around its gas competition. Only problem is they start at about $70,000. I don't know about many other young people, but I'm pretty sure most young people can't afford a $70,000 sedan to be practical. I mean, I know a lot of college kids who can barely afford better than ramen noodles at times. So this is actually a really good scenario to be in, though, because right now, the only thing really keeping young people from buying electric cars, and people in general actually, is price. This is actually changing, and it's changing very rapidly. The underlying technology that makes an electric vehicle work, there's three main components. You have a battery, an inverter, and a motor. And the most expensive of which, and the most critical, which is the battery, is absolutely plummeting when it comes to cost. They're plummeting and they're getting much more dense. So for this exact same amount of space, you can get much more energy in there. And it makes it so, as this vehicle right here, this was announced last week, believe it or not. This is GM's first attempt at a practical electric vehicle. It'll be a 200-mile electric car with a price point of under $30,000. And they're not the only one to do it. The other car company that's really big in the electric market, Tesla, has promised to do one for even cheaper than that. The following companies, Audi, Volkswagen, and a couple other US car companies have already pledged to do the same thing. And this is all by 2017. So the really big component that's keeping people from buying electric cars, especially young people, which is price and practicality, is quickly going away. The thing we are left with is perception. And if you actually start thinking about it, there is a problem with perception of electric vehicles. I think this audience here today is probably a progressive bunch, where they're able to think more long-term and think into the future a bit. But I challenge you to put yourselves in the shoes of an American who's been driving a gas-powered car for 20 years. It's going to be a really hard sell to make them think that this, or this, or this can ever be a normal thing. It's always going to have this little intangible bit of a weirdness to it that's really, really hard to shake. This is actually the beauty of youth. My friend Ken Robinson, I wish I knew him actually, but he gave the most talked about, the most viewed TED Talk in history. I think it's close to 6 million views now. His talk was all about youth, and specifically how we educate youth essentially out of their creativity. And this really hinges on a very critical component. Young people, They don't have those perceptions. They haven't been driving a gas-powered car for 20 years. So you have this beautiful blank slate that we have an obligation to start painting. It really boils down to a significant problem, though. The picture we're painting is solely talking about the environmental impact of electric vehicles, which is an incredibly important side of it. But the reality is, this can only appeal to a very specific market segment. It's a beautiful thing having a vehicle that is incredibly good for the environment, but when you start looking at the actual aggregate American consumer, it's really, really hard to convince them to buy a car on the sole purpose of this saves a lot of trees or this doesn't use gas. It needs to actually be practical for them. And the fundamental problem is the way we're marketing electric vehicles right now is only on their environmental impacts. We're not looking at the practical side of it. We're not looking at how their maintenance is much lower and how they can be much cheaper to drive and to maintain. Simply put, too, we're not showing that they're cool. I'm not sure that anybody in this room realizes the incredible mechanics that make an electric vehicle have the possibility to be an incredible sports car. They can provide 100% of the car's power the second you put your foot on the gas. There's no transmission, there's no gear shaft, there's just instantaneous power. And when applied correctly, you can create a vehicle that outperforms its gas competitors and does so quietly. But yet we still market about how many Arctic foxes we can save. I love Arctic foxes as much as the next guy, but I don't think that's going to be the critical thing in changing someone's purchasing decision. So, I promised you guys some history. So we're going to look at a historical example of how we made a big change. This right here is Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh was a 25-year-old guy who grew up just loving airplanes. He grew up loving airplanes in a time when they really weren't that prominent. He dropped out of college and went and started work as a mail courier and eventually was a U.S. Air Force reservist. And on May 20th, 1927, he actually did an incredible feat. He crossed the Atlantic Ocean in a single-prop plane with no modern GPS or other navigational aids. So Lindbergh, what he did is he made aviation cool, and you can see this in the numbers. The year before Lindbergh flew, there were 6,000 commercial airline passengers in the United States. Just 18 months after he made his historic flight to Paris, there was over 180,000, a 30-fold increase. And it was largely perpetrated by the fact that Lindbergh, when he arrived in Paris, he arrived to fanfare like this. He did something that was so incredibly transformative and so incredibly cool that it got people thinking that you didn't have to spend your 2 weeks to get from New York to London. You could be there the next day. You didn't need a ballroom and a massive ship to cross the ocean. You could fly there. So Lindbergh did this amazing thing of he made a historically scary and weird and strange thing that nobody could really understand. He started by making it cool. And then by making it cool, he made it commonplace. So the young guy I talked about earlier, Jackson, he's actually a real person. He's my little sister's friend, and he's 12. And he's constantly talking about cars. His favorite ones are Bugatti Veyron and a Chevrolet Corvette. He constantly talks about these. He knows every little fact, every little detail. He can tell you how many parts make up the transmission. It's just incredibly intricate details about these cars. And the really thing that's made me think is, what if we can change Jackson, instead of talking about a Chevrolet Corvette, to start talking about an electric sports car? If we can make that fundamental change when he's young and when he's open to these new ideas and doesn't have that 20 years of driving gas cars behind him, and make him actually think that these are cool, then that's our avenue in making him go and buy it as his first car. Not everyone can buy these sports cars, but they don't have to. If they grow up thinking they're cool, then it's not going to be much of a jump for them to go and say, hey, I want to get an electric car for my first vehicle. It becomes commonplace by making it cool. I'd actually like to leave you guys with a prediction. I challenge you to keep an eye on the media within the next few months and look for this change in advertising. I think we're going to go away from how many Arctic foxes we can save and start portraying how incredibly fast and how cool and how intricate these vehicles are. So we're moving from strictly talking about their environmental benefits to talking about how they're cool. There's very smart people with a vested interest in making these successful that are going to capitalize on the technology being much cheaper and start changing their market. So Jackson and other people younger than me and my generation can go to that car dealership when they buy their first car and make the decision to get an electric vehicle. Thank you.